Boa tarde, sejam bem-vindos no nosso painel. Eu gostaria de passar alguns avisos para os senhores em português antes de a gente iniciar o painel. Primeiro, que todas as apresentações serão em inglês, então se os senhores precisarem de fone de ouvido, por favor, eles estão distribuindo ali na porta. Lembrando para não esquecerem de devolver na saída. E que as fichas de perguntas e respostas estão com as recepcionistas. Então, se precisarem fazer as perguntas por escrito, por favor, e aqui eu consigo ler vocês colocando os nomes para quem é a pergunta. Também temos uma pesquisa de avaliação, por favor, não esqueçam de preencher antes de sair, e as fichas podem ser entregues aqui no Help Desk, no primeiro andar ou então no térreo. E todas as palestras estão sendo transmitidas ao vivo pela internet e serão disponibilizadas no site do evento nos próximos dias. Obrigada. Com isso, então, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nayana Rizzo. I'm the Institutional Relations Advisor at UNICA. I'm here today as the moderator of this panel, and I have here with me a fine group of experts that surely won't need any of my guidance, but I'll be up here anyway. Let me introduce the speakers. Mr. Sergio Trindade, President of Chet International. We have here also Professor Shi-Zong Lee, Executive Director of the U.S. SINO Joint Center for Biofuel Research in China. Mr. Chet Culver, former governor of Iowa and former chairman of the U.S. National Governors Association, Biofuel Coalition. Mr. Nelson Sam, Global Managing Director of POINTCARBON. And to my right, Paulo Sotero, the director for the Woodrow Wilson Center. Before I give the floor to the panelists, I would just like to give a quick introduction on our theme today for the panel. Public policies and global development of biofuels, the challenges and opportunities. We saw that in these last 2 days, we have heard many professionals talk about the future of the sector, both in Brazil and internationally. And the goal of our panel is really to continue this conversation, but in a sense, it being one of the last panel of the summit, to go a step further by promoting a brainstorm on how we, as a global community, can make the most out of the already known challenges and opportunities that exist when creating and implementing public policies in the global development of biofuels. We also know that in order to develop the public policies for energy and biofuels in particular, there's a need for it to be stable, and that means that government and civil society need to have in mind exactly where they're going, and most importantly, why it is that they're going that direction when the strategic planning for energy diversification of a country is defined. With this scenario in mind, it's clear that according to the agroclimatic conditions, land availability, development of technology, there will be countries that produce and supply, and also countries that will demand and consume. Today, just to give you a bit of information, there are over 100 countries that could be producing ethanol from sugarcane alone. So that means that for many of them, job creation, rural development, energy diversification is what it means to be able to produce this biofuel. Data from the BNDES, the Brazilian National Bank for Economic and Social Development, show that global ethanol production has doubled since 2000. The production of biodiesel has expanded 3 times in the same period, while oil production increased only by 7%. However, in these last 5 years, and this is the information we had in the last panel at the plenary downstairs, is that after the record trade performances in 2008, ethanol trade decreased by almost 8%. And that doesn't exactly point us in the right direction when we're talking about creating a global market. So I raised the question, what are the measures to overcome challenges and enhance opportunities for the creation of this long-awaited global market for biofuels? So I will begin the presentation asking our panelists to bear in mind that the challenges to build a global market require partnerships and also cooperation. Each panelist will have 10 minutes for the opening presentation, and the idea, as I said before, is really to promote a debate with the written questions from the audience and also a productive dialogue amongst ourselves here, the 5 panelists. And you may also please ask each other questions here. Our first panelist is Mr. Sergio Trindade, who will talk about the future of biofuels and the role of new technologies. Thank you.
Senhoras e senhoras, eu estou muito satisfeito de estar aqui com vocês, agradeço à UNICA pela oportunidade de estar aqui presente. Em deferência a 3 dos panelistas que são adeptos da língua inglesa, eu vou fazer a apresentação em inglês. A ideia é mostrar a vocês de uma vez quase que resumo do que eu vou falar, the 5 main points that I would like to convey to you, all in one gulp. We are all here because we're interested in ethanol and biofuels, and sometimes we think that this is an infinite resource. I want to convey to you that although biofuels have and will have an important role in the energy supply and consumption of the world, its future is limited. And I will explain why it is limited. And I begin by saying that one of the reasons that limits the contribution of biofuels to the energy supply and demand is the huge scale of fuels demand. It is, in terms of volumes, it is extraordinary, the volume of fuels consumed in this world. And that will have an impact on the supply of first and second generation technologies, the feedstock supply. If you want to have a stable market and sufficient presentation, you have to have access to sustainable supplies of feedstock, and that is a problem. Policy measures, public policy measures can be deployed to address these issues. There's always also in this environment investment risks. If this industry is private, as it is in most of the world, private capital has options to employ resources. And if the perceived risk is too high, it may discourage such investments. And such risks include economic, environmental, social risks, which are sustainability risks, and policy uncertainties and inconsistencies. We've seen in this country and in all countries in the world that there's not always a convergence between policy intentions and policies in place. And investors do not like to operate in an environment where there are uncertainties on the policy level. And the other point that I want to bring to you is the need for international trade, free international trade for biofuels to be sustainable. I will give some more thoughts on that later on. And another issue that impacts on the deployability of biofuels is the fact that there are other things going on in the world at the same time that we are producing ethanol here or biodiesel. There are new technologies, and this conference is a place where many of you have listened to lots of new ideas, and some of them already in the marketplace. There are other energy systems besides fuels. There are new demand profiles. The way we organize our lives today require the use of, in some cases, individual transportation. If in the future our lives in the various cities in the world is organized differently, then maybe you don't need to use so much individual transport, and that has an impact on that. And that may lessen the need for biofuels. Now, I want to explain to you that every point in time in our history, there is more than one source of energy at play. And as we move towards the future, there are more simultaneous sources of energy at play than in the past. It's interesting that in this diagram, what you have is percentages of the share of certain energies. Up until 1900, wood was the principal source of energy in the world. It took 1950 for coal to cease its domination, and then another 50 years to get oil beginning to decline. And the next fuel that will be the dominant fuel for a while is natural gas. We already begin to see it in our cities in Brazil, in taxis and in buses and in private transportation. And as you can see, at each and every point in time, there is more than one source of energy at play. And that means that biofuels have a role to play, but this role, for the reasons I mentioned, is limited. Important, but limited. Just take a look at today, where we are today. 2011, where oil is still the dominant fuel, but coal and natural gas are still very important. Hydro has some importance. Nuclear is still there. The scenario suggests it will disappear at some point in time. And what is called the modern biomass, in which ethanol, of which ethanol is part, has a tiny little contribution there. And then as we move towards 2050, this modern biomass, which includes ethanol and other biofuels, will increase. But also solar, natural gas, even oil will remain important. As we go to the end of the century, then solar becomes the dominant, and modern biomass, which includes biofuels, is still there. Again, important but limited contribution. Now getting to the specifics, and what are the issues regarding liquid biofuels towards the future? In 2010, after all the effort in various countries in the world, the biofuels managed to get only 3% of oil. And the IEA, the International Energy Agency, has a recently published study that suggests that 27% of oil will be achieved by biofuels in 2050. I contend that this is more or less the ceiling, and that scenario that I showed you before suggests the same thing. Again, the limiting factors are land. Although it's renewable, the land is not renewable. The land is a finite piece of capital. And that piece of capital can provide higher yields, yes, but it's not stretchable. It is there and will remain there. Water, in many situations, is a limiting factor. Labor, financing, market, and policy uncertainties are at play. In addition, you have local environmental issues that can plague the biofuels. And, of course, the greenhouse gases emissions towards which the liquid biofuels can bring a contribution. Now, just to give you a measure of the scale, this is a map of North America in which the circles represent the area occupied by certain crops sufficient to produce the demand for liquid fuels in the United States. As you can see, soybean will never, unless the United States conquers Canada and a little bit more of Mexico, will never be able to supply the U.S. demands. At the centerpiece is algae, which is a promise at this point in time, but it is expected to have high yields and productivity. So with a smaller area, you can supply the United States.